Welcome to another Fantasy Goodfellas video where we talk about the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 4. You ready?
The Fantasy Goodfellas.
Boom, boom, boom. Rolling on the field.
The Fantasy Goodfellas.
Before we get started, let me explain what's going to happen in this video. I have pulled and inputted the top rankings from experts across the internet for this week's rankings, and I'm going to discuss and show you some stats that I think are going to be helpful with you setting your own lineups. All right, let's get started. First up, we have CeeDee Lamb at the New York Giants. Now, CeeDee Lamb has been a disappointment after that contract holdout in training camp. And what did he do in week 3? He only had 67 receiving yards, and that's not looking good. And his overall week-to-week rankings, so far he's been 24th, 12th, and 49th. And it seems to be getting worse, but I hope Dallas can turn it around. At number 2, Justin Jefferson at the Green Bay Packers. It was nice to see Justin Jefferson have a good game. He did 81 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, but the biggest bright spot on that whole team is Sam Darnold, who had 4 TDs in week 3. At number 3, you have Rashee Rice at the Los Angeles Chargers. The thing I like about Rashee Rice is he's playing with a lot of determination, a lot of energy, and it shows. He does 110 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and he just got 12 of 14 targets. But if you want to look at his receiving yards through the week, that's what it looks like for 2024 so far. At number 4, you have Malik Neighbors versus the Dallas Cowboys. You know, I used to think that the Dallas Cowboys had a great defense, but this year they've been stinking it up. Here you got Malik Neighbors coming off a hot week with 78 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. And if you look at his production and his rankings, he's been in the top 10 twice. And so that looks really well for Malik Neighbors owners. Number 5, you have Jamar Chase at the Carolina Panthers. Now, Jamar Chase had that great performance in week 3, but the only thing I don't like is that 6 receptions on 7 targets. If you look at that, that's 6, 5, 11, 14 passes, the whole thing. But looks like a lot of swing passes. You got the running backs, you got the tight ends in there. But the only bright spot on that whole Cincinnati Bengals team, besides Joe Burrow, was Jamar Chase, in my opinion. So he had a good week for those fantasy owners. But again, if you have Jamar Chase, you're going to be starting him regardless. At number 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the Seattle Seahawks. So far, again, when it comes to these things, I'm doing my fantasy research by making this video, and sometimes I come across these things just like I'm reading it, watching the stats come across. So if you notice, I'll be surprised when I see some of these stats. But right now, I haven't really looked him up since I'm not a fantasy owner of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't really know what he's done week to week. So I'm just going to look at this graphics machine. And then you have 120 yards in week 2, TDs, 1 TD last week, and points seems to be picking it up. So that's what it's looking like for him. At number 7, you got Marvin Harrison Jr. versus the Washington Commanders. And what did he do after that week 2 performance? He followed that up with 64 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. But, you know, that bodes well for him. He's doing what he's expected to do as one of the highly drafted rookie wide receivers this year. At number 8, you have Garrett Wilson versus the Denver Broncos. Garrett Wilson finally got into the end zone this week, but those 33 receiving yards, it does not help your fantasy points when you're trying to win those close games. But Garrett Wilson, again, he's the top receiver. He's going to be playing well. You're going to be playing regardless. At number 9, you got Chris Olave at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta's playing strong, so I expect good things from Chris Olave again in week 4. Here, he had 6 receptions on 6 targets, 86 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and that's all you expect. But overall, there's some bright spots happening here, right? You got Alvin Kamara having a stellar week 2 game. You got him following that up with 87 yards on the ground, 40 receiving yards. Then you have Chris Olave getting into the end zone. It just seems to be a balanced offense in a way. Just need more yardage. At number 10, you got Nico Collins versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville is in shambles right now. I expect C.J. Stroud to pick it up this week. I expect Nico Collins to pick it up. So I expect him to kind of be in the top 10 like he is. I just expect him to be in the mid top 10. At number 11, you got Mike Evans. This is the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, it's going to be hard. That's not good for week 3, right? 2 receptions on 3 targets, 17 yards. That's not cutting it. But if we look overall, he's not getting any yardage. He got into the end zone twice in week 1. But if you look at it's just going down. But I think it's a Baker Mayfield show, right? So that's what it's going to be. At number 12, Chris Godwin versus the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, right now, by looking at these Fantasy Pro predictions, 2 Tampa receivers in the top 15 is shocking to me. I don't expect that to do well. I don't think that's going to follow up. At number 13, DK Metcalf at the Detroit Lions. Now, DK Metcalf, Geno Smith, yep. He did 289 yards, 1 passing TD, and that TD went to DK Metcalf. He had a good week, but the only problem is 4 receptions. And I think that's the part that makes me nervous. But you do have Zach Charbonnet kicking butt. He had 91 rushing yards, 16 receiving yards, but the 2 TDs. So that kind of took away some of the touchdowns from those receivers. At number 14, Brandon Ayuk versus the New England Patriots. And one thing I'm going to do on these stat machines, I want to see what the defense looks like when we're going against it. I want to see it right here. But again, I'm not following any San Francisco players. I don't watch any of those games. But if you look what's going on with Brandon, 65, 45th, 73rd, it's just you expected better things from Brandon. At number 15, Devontae Adams versus the Cleveland Browns. Devontae Adams, he had 40 receiving yards. That's not looking too good. At week 2, he had 110 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdowns. That's what we expect for Devontae Adams. In week 3, it was not that. All right, at number 16, you have DJ Moore versus the Los Angeles Rams. And maybe Caleb Williams is picking it up again. He did get in. Let's see. I know somebody scored, and it was Rome that scored with 112 yards, 1 receiving touchdown. I guarantee you, if you picked up Rome, you might have not have started him. The question is, could this be Caleb Williams' number 1 target? Could be. Maybe there's some conflict with DJ Moore. We did see that little attitude DJ Moore had on the sidelines. So I'm going to go ahead and call it right here. I think Rome is going to be the better receiver this week. I think there's going to be something built in with Caleb Williams and him. Number 17, Juan Jennings versus the New England Patriots. And again, look at this. He was your number 1 receiver in week 3. 3 receiving touchdowns for 175 receiving yards. The question is, did you start him? Now, again, if you look on the season to see where Jennings was ranked, that's where it's going to be. He was out of the top 30 in the first 2 weeks, and all of a sudden he was the number 1. Is that what we're going to expect? I don't expect him to land in the top 5, but I do expect him to be back in the top 10. At number 18, you have Amari Cooper versus the Las Vegas Raiders. And again, it's the touchdowns that are giving you the points. He came in as the 3rd top receiver. And does that mean that Deshaun Watson is back. I just don't think he's ever going to be that back. You're just going to have some stellar performances from these receivers here and there. It's not going to be steady, though. At number 19, you got Drake London versus the New Orleans Saints. Now, this is a team I really like. I think Kirk Cousins is playing well. I think he's revitalized that. There's a lot of excitement when it comes to their offense. They're scoring points. And if you look at this week, they had, you got to run it. Bijan Robinson scoring, Kirk Cousins scored, and Drake London. They're going against the Saints. Pretty good defense. That's going to be an interesting game to watch. At number 20, Zay Flowers versus the Buffalo Bills. That was an interesting week in week 3 for Baltimore. And if you didn't watch that game, I didn't watch that game, but I know Derrick Henry went off. He had 151 rushing yards, 2 TDs. You had 1 catch for 23 yards. That's really well. But if you look at Zay Flowers, he should be your number 1 guy, and that's not cutting it. And if you want to see how he's doing on the overall week-to-week, this is we're pulling this up in the stat machine. In week 2, he got up to just outside the top 10 at ranked 11th, and then hasn't done nothing since. At number 21, Tyreek Hill versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, this is what we're looking at here. Tyreek Hill, Skylar Thompson. This is what it looks like. Skylar Thompson got hurt. Now it's Tim Boyle. Is Skylar Thompson going to be back? I doubt it. So now you're looking at the third quarterback. That can't bode well for anybody who's got a Miami Dolphin receiver this year. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking, and it's costing you. At number 22, George Pickens at the Indianapolis Colts. Again, I haven't seen any Pittsburgh Steelers games. This is why this stat machine is so important, because I don't know what's going on up there. And you got Justin Fields. Looks like he had a good game, 245 passing yards, 1 passing TD, 1 rushing TD. But let's just look. Is it going to the receivers, the tight ends? You got some yardage going to the running backs, some yardage going to the tight ends. But it looks like he's slinging it. But 4, 5, 2. I think Calvin Austin, is that going to be your number 1 guy? George Pickens is good. Maybe that offense is picking up. At number 23, you have Deontay Johnson versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati's going to look to respond big. And here you got Deontay Johnson with the Carolina, the stunner. Yeah, 122 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. If you look what's going on, Andy Dalton maybe settled things down up there in Carolina. They got Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Chuba Hubbard had a stellar game. I think that offense is going to be picking up a little bit. Andy Dalton, he's been around. He's steady. He's your steady. At number 24, Jameson Williams versus the Seattle Seahawks. I was always afraid of picking anybody with the Detroit Lions just because they spread that ball around too much. So here you had Jared Goff, mediocre yardage game, 199 yards, 2 TDs. Not bad if you're starting him. But where's the ball going to? 75 receiving yards from Amanda St. Brown. Sam Laporta, he was a high draft pick for tight ends. He only got 36 yards, and that's what it looks like. At number 25, Stephon Diggs versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Stephon Diggs, a lot of times people say, oh, how can you rank Diggs so low? And I can tell you one thing. First of all, it's not my rankings. And I'm going to point this part of the video. These are not my rankings. I'm just talking about it and looking to see where they're ranking him. 94 receiving yards on the season. Let's look at, that was his best game yet. TDs. He only got into the end zone 2 times in week 1. And here's his fantasy points. Week 1, those TDs helped him get some points. And in week 3, it was dropped off. So Stephon Diggs ain't doing that well, in my opinion. It's just too many weapons, and C.D. Stroud not living up to second-year expectations. At number 26, Khalil Shakir at the Baltimore Ravens. Here he did 6 receptions for 72 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. You got a slew of different receivers catching the ball. And I think the biggest bright spot here is Josh Allen. Josh Allen is just, he's the center focus. I think getting rid of Diggs has probably helped him out, because then you don't have a conflicting voice in the locker room, and that was very helpful. It seems to be showing now. Now in number 27, you got Terry McLaurin at the Arizona Cardinals. And this is where, you like to say, hey, you have these receivers pop in, they do really well, and then they pop out. You had Marvin Harrison, did really great in week 2, backed off in week 3. So these top players are always navigating, moving around. And here you have Terry McLaurin, not in the top 2. No, not in the top 30 in the first 2 weeks, and then he was ranked 9th in week 3 with 100 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. I saw some of this game, and it looks like you got Jaden Daniels with some Russian production, and that's going to help him. And they got some weapons. These are not slouches here. Zach Ertz, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson. These are star players. So if Jaden Daniels can just steady the ship, they'll do all right. At number 28, Jaden Reed versus the Minnesota Vikings. And let's look at Jaden Reed. I didn't watch this, but I know Malik Willis is doing well. And he got 50 receiving yards, 19 rushing yards. I think that's the rushing yards is really what helped him and propelled him into the top 30. When it comes to these rushing yards, you can't count on it. They're not always going to make those moves. And at number 29, you have T. Higgins at the Carolina Panthers. T. Higgins have high expectations from, and he only did 39 receiving yards. So I like to look at some graphs. I guess he was injured the first two parts of the first 2 weeks. Then all of a sudden he pops in with a mediocre game. But people are talking about T. Higgins was going to have a breakout week. Didn't happen. Not sure it'll happen in week 4 either. And lastly, you got Rashid Shaheed at the Atlanta Falcons. Everybody was dogging out these rankings last week. And a goose egg. I don't even know if he was injured, but, a lot of times people are like, hey, how do you put him so low? And I think it just shows that no matter what happens, that ball might not go each receiver's way. But that is going to do it for our week 4 rankings. Remember, this is not our rankings. I'm going to point it out in this video. If you comment and say these are terrible rankings, I do want to let you know, if you're interested in posting your own rankings, contact me. We have a feature that makes it real simple to create your own rankings. Contact me. And that's going to do it for this week's video. If you're a fantasy owner, it's been a kind of weird season so far. Some of those top players are not really performing up to standards. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase finally got back, but none of those guys are living up to their expectations. All right. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week.